The storm rolled over the city with a fury that shook the glass walls of the Grant mansion. Lightning illuminated the vast estate for a split second, revealing shadows that felt almost alive. Inside, 7-year-old Ethan Grant sat curled in a corner of his room, clutching his toy car as though it could shield him from the darkness. His mother had died 2 years earlier, and though the mansion was filled with every luxury money could buy, the boy had never felt more alone. Outside his door, voices clashed. Victoria Hale, the elegant fiancée of millionaire Alexander Grant, was scolding him again, her words sharp and merciless. "You will stay here until you learn to behave," she hissed, reaching for the lock. That was when Isabella Cruz appeared. Newly hired as a maid, she had been invisible in the household until now, quiet, efficient, unnoticed. But the sight of Victoria towering over the trembling child awakened something fierce within her. "Enough!" Isabella's voice rang through the hall. She stepped forward, placing herself between Ethan and Victoria. For the first time, the so-called maid revealed the fire in her eyes. What no one in that mansion knew was that Isabella carried a past and secrets that would change their lives forever. Chapter 1. The Storm and the Stranger. The storm outside raged like a wild animal trying to claw its way into the city. Thunder cracked across the sky, shaking the glass panels of the Grant mansion, and rain poured in relentless sheets down the stone walls. The house, a fortress of wealth and technology perched on the hills above San Francisco, stood tall against the elements, but inside, the atmosphere was far from safe. 7-year-old Ethan Grant sat curled up in the far corner of his room, his thin arms wrapped tightly around a battered toy car. His dark eyes were wide with fear, though the fear wasn't for the storm. Lightning he could endure, thunder he could ignore. What terrified him most was the woman outside his door. "Ethan," Victoria Hale's sharp voice sliced through the silence, more terrifying than the thunder outside. "I told you, no more crying, no more nonsense. You're too old for this." The boy's lips trembled, but he said nothing. His mother had taught him that silence was sometimes safer than words. His mother. The thought made his chest ache. It had been 2 years since Sarah Grant had lost her battle to cancer, and yet the memory of her voice, soft and kind, still echoed in the corners of Ethan's mind. Now, instead of gentle lullabies, he had Victoria's scolding. Victoria's heels clicked against the polished floor as she strode to his door. She was tall, elegant, perfectly put together. Her blonde hair styled into soft waves, her silk dress tailored to perfection. She looked every bit the future wife of a millionaire. But Ethan knew the truth. Behind the flawless smile was steel, and beneath the polished exterior was cruelty. "You'll stay in here until you learn not to defy me," Victoria hissed, her hand reaching for the lock on the door. It was at that very moment that another voice broke through the storm. "Stop! Don't touch him!" The words were sharp, commanding, and unexpected. They didn't come from Alexander Grant, Ethan's father. They came from a woman Victoria barely acknowledged, a woman she had dismissed as a nobody. Isabella Cruz, the maid. Isabella had been working at the mansion for less than a week. Hired quietly through an agency, she had slipped into the household routine without much notice. She was efficient, discreet, and unassuming, or so it had seemed. But in that moment, standing in the hallway with the storm raging behind her, Isabella was anything but invisible. She stepped forward, Her eyes locked on Victoria, her tone steady. "That's not how you treat a child." Victoria froze, caught off guard by the audacity of the maid. Then, slowly, a mocking smile spread across her face. "Well, what a scene!" she drawled, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A maid lecturing me on parenting? Do you even know who you're talking to?" Isabella ignored the insult. She bent down and placed a protective arm around Ethan, who instinctively clung to her apron as if it were a lifeline. His little body trembled, but for the first time that night he felt something resembling safety. Isabella's voice softened as she whispered to him, "It's all right. I won't let anyone hurt you." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You're overstepping your place." "Maybe," Isabella said evenly, rising to her full height. "But I know cowardice when I see it." The tension in the hallway thickened. Victoria opened her mouth to retaliate, but before she could speak, the heavy oak door at the end of the corridor creaked open. Alexander Grant appeared. The man was striking in his presence, even in something as simple as a gray sweater and dark trousers. Broad-shouldered, tall, with sharp features softened only by the weariness in his eyes. At 40, he was one of the most powerful men in Silicon Valley, a pioneer in AI technology, and a millionaire many times over. Yet at that moment, he looked less like a titan of industry and more like a father torn between confusion and frustration. "What's going on here?" His voice was low but carried authority. Victoria was quick to react. She turned to him with a dramatic gasp, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank God you're here, Alex." This maid, this woman, barged into Ethan's room and frightened him. I was trying to calm him when she suddenly appeared, acting crazy. "That's not true," Isabella protested, her voice strong despite her racing heartbeat. "I heard shouting and came to check. She was about to lock Ethan in his room." "That's an outrageous lie," Victoria snapped, her cheeks flushing with anger. "She's trying to slander me so she looks like a savior." Alexander's gaze flicked between the two women. His eyes lingered on his son, who was still clutching Isabella's apron, refusing to let go. The boy's tiny shoulders trembled, and when he glanced up at his father, there was fear in his eyes, not of Isabella, but of Victoria. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then, finally, he exhaled sharply. "Enough. I don't want any more scenes in this house." Victoria smirked, certain she had won. Isabella, however, stood her ground, her hand resting protectively on Ethan's small shoulder. "Isabella," Alexander said, after a pause, running a hand through his dark hair as if trying to organize his thoughts. "Take Ethan to the garden. He needs to calm down." Isabella hesitated, but then nodded. She guided Ethan away, casting one last steady glance at Victoria. The stepmother's arrogant smile followed them down the hall like a shadow. In the back garden, the storm had eased to a drizzle, and the scent of wet earth filled the air. Isabella sat with Ethan on a stone bench, wrapping an arm around him. He still clutched his toy car, and his small body shivered despite the blanket she had brought with her. "It's all right now, Ethan," she whispered, brushing damp strands of hair from his forehead. "Out here, it's just you and me." "Why is she so mean to me?" he asked in a broken voice. "Did I do something wrong?" Isabella's heart twisted. She shook her head firmly. "No, sweetheart, you did nothing wrong. Sometimes people become bitter because they're unhappy with themselves. That's not your fault." Ethan tilted his head. "She's like an evil witch from a fairy tale." That earned a soft laugh from Isabella. An evil witch, without a magic wand, and with way too much perfume, she teased. Ethan giggled for the first time that night, and the sound filled Isabella's chest with warmth. But their moment of peace didn't last long. The sharp click of heels on the stone path announced Victoria's arrival. She stepped onto the porch, her arms crossed, and her smile cold. "What a touching scene," she sneered. "The maid playing mother." Isabella rose slowly, keeping Ethan behind her. Her voice was calm but firm. "I'm just doing my job. Your job is to clean floors, not to fill my fiancé's child with nonsense," Victoria snapped. "And certainly not to speak badly of me." "I don't have to speak badly of you," Isabella said softly, her eyes steady. "Your actions speak louder than anything I could say." Victoria's face darkened, and for a moment Isabella thought she might lash out. But then the woman composed herself with an icy smile. "Watch yourself, Maid. Girls like you are easily replaced." "Maybe," Isabella replied with a faint smirk. "But that must be why so many before me quit this house so quickly. Perhaps they realized they weren't hired to clean. They were hired to survive." That night, long after the storm had passed, Isabella lay awake in her small staff quarters. Her mind replayed the events of the evening, the look of terror on Ethan's face, the venom in Victoria's words, and the unreadable expression on Alexander's face. She hadn't come to the mansion looking for trouble. She had come because she needed a job, a roof, and a chance to rebuild her life after everything she had lost. But now she was in the middle of something bigger than herself. She felt it deep in her bones. Ethan needed her. And for reasons she couldn't quite explain, she needed him too. What no one in that house knew, not Alexander, not Victoria, not even Ethan, was that Isabella Cruz was far more than just a maid. She carried scars of her own, skills she had tried to bury, and a past that had taught her one unshakable truth. When the innocent are in danger, you don't walk away. You fight. And she would fight for this child, no matter what it cost. Chapter 2. The House with Two Faces. Morning arrived with a shy sun and the scent of cinnamon drifting from the kitchen. The storm had rinsed the city clean. Leaves shone, glass glittered, and the Grant Mansion, house of straight lines and expensive silences, looked almost kind. Isabella stood at the stove in a pale blue apron, flipping pancakes the way her grandmother had taught her, wrist loose, timing patient. A tiny speaker on the counter hummed low jazz, barely audible above the whisper of batter-meeting heat. "Circle or star?" she asked without turning. "Both," Ethan said from his stool, the word muffled by an enormous grin and two missing front teeth. He swung his legs as though they were metronomes, hair still sleep-wild, toy car parked by his juice. "And one rocket." "Ambitious," she said, shaping batter into a wonky star. Then a thinner oval, pinching a tail that would, with luck, resemble a rocket's flare. If it turns into a potato, you're legally obligated to call it a rocket anyway. Ethan snorted. The sound was new, less the tight, air-sucking giggle of a wary child, and more a laugh that took up space. "Deal." Alexander appeared in the doorway, tie draped around his neck, sleeves rolled, phone in hand. He paused when he saw them. Something softened in his face, a tiny unclenching that even he felt before he knew he wore it. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning, Dad," Ethan chirped. "We're engineering edible rockets." Promising line of research. Alexander set his phone face down an act that felt like setting down armor. Do edible rockets have patents? They have sprinkles. Isabella slid a plate onto the counter. Which are better? He looked at her then, really looked, and the gratitude that had hovered unspoken the night before rose in his chest again. Thank you, he said, not sure whether he meant for breakfast, for last night, for stepping in when he hesitated. You're welcome, she answered, reading more in his voice than he intended to show, and choosing mercy by changing the subject. Coffee? Please. He watched her move, efficient, economical. There was a steadiness about her that made noise settle. Ethan ate with focus, feet tapping a rhythm against the stool. The moment fractured, when heels struck marble. Victoria entered radiant and sharp, crisp white blouse, obsidian pencil skirt, a necklace like a comet around her throat. She took in the scene and smiled with her teeth. How domestic, she said lightly. I didn't know the job description included culinary performance. It didn't, Isabella replied, unfazed. I asked for a raise in sprinkles. Ethan bit back a laugh, eyes flicking between women. He was learning the currents of this house. He knew where not to place his boat. Alex, Victoria cooed, crossing to brush his cheek, a kiss that landed on air when he turned, already reaching for his coffee. For a beat, her eyes went flat, before she brightened again. We're still on for dinner with the Calder team tonight? I booked saffron and slate. He nodded. 7. I'll bring the draft. Perfect. She touched the rim of Ethan's plate, moved it a fraction as though aligning the child with cutlery would bring obedience. Finish quickly, Ethan. Piano at 9. 8:30, he corrected without looking up. Ms. Dana said 8:30 today. Victoria's smile tightened. I stand corrected. Isabella set coffee by Alexander's left hand, the way she'd noticed he preferred. I'll take Ethan out to the garden after piano. 10 minutes of sun won't hurt. It's autumn, Victoria said, as if the season itself were suspicious. He'll catch cold. Then we'll bring a jacket, Isabella said, gentler than the words. Alexander sipped his coffee, a small anchor in the exchange. A jacket will do. Victoria's gaze slid across Isabella like a scalpel. Of course. The day moved the way days inside big houses do, like a machine with too many polished parts. Schedules hummed, contractors came, gardeners left trails of damp soil. The housekeeper checked lists, while the sous chef confided in the refrigerator. Screens glowed behind closed doors. At noon, with piano scales still echoing faintly, Isabella carried linens toward the laundry. The staff corridors had a smell of lemon and something sweeter, the shadow of past detergent. She rounded the corner and saw it. The laundry bin outside her small quarters cracked open an inch. She hadn't left it that way. Isabella paused, hearing her training instructor's voice from years ago. Don't touch the door you think you have to touch. Look before you decide to see. She scanned the hallway, silent, empty. The air held the not-quite rightness she'd come to trust. She crouched by the bin and, using a rag, lifted the lid. On top lay the towels she'd carried in earlier. Halfway down, tucked in the fold of a sweatshirt that was not hers, a wink of silver. Isabella didn't move for a full 3 seconds. Then she slid on latex gloves from the cleaning caddy. She always kept a pair, and eased the sweatshirt aside. Nestled like a trap was Victoria's starburst bracelet, a spray of diamonds that had glinted at breakfast. She took a breath through her nose. Whoever planted it had been sloppy. Wrist-level lint on the sweatshirt didn't match the dust of her quarters, and there were faint tracks on the bin's lid, drag lines as if someone had lifted it with a ring on their finger, not a rag. The thought rose uninvited. She's nervous. Good. Isabella took a photo, time-stamped, framing the bracelet and the gloves and the bin. She slid the jewelry into a zip bag without making a speech to the empty hall. Speeches were for rooms with witnesses. On her way to Alexander's office, she passed the side door to the patio and caught sight of a reflection in the glass. A woman, with perfect hair lingering by the hydrangeas, phone pressed to her ear, voice a whispery knife. Isabella didn't need to hear the words to know which way they pointed. She kept walking. Alexander looked up when she knocked. "Come in." She closed the door behind her and set the bag on his desk. He frowned, opened it, and the breath he took had shape. Victoria's bracelet. "In my laundry bin," Isabella said, "under a sweatshirt I've never seen." Silence stretched a taut wire between them. Alexander opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "Isabella, that bracelet is expensive," she said, and it fell exactly where it would be found later with maximum drama. He rubbed his temple slowly. A gesture she'd seen when spreadsheets didn't reconcile or narratives didn't make sense. "You're saying someone planted it?" "Yes." "Who?" He knew. Asking was a ritual for men who wanted facts to absolve them from what intuition already had. She tilted her head. "Who benefits?" He stared at the diamonds glittering like captured rain. Behind his ribs, something ugly and familiar stirred, the urge to rationalize, to smooth, to wait one more day before naming the thing that was rotting. "I'll handle it." "I'm not asking you to confront her," Isabella said, softening the edge. "I'm asking you to consider that Ethan is not safe with her." His gaze shot to hers, bare and startled. Safety wrapped around money in this house like vines around a pillar. One had always justified the other. He had told himself that Victoria's sternness was structure, that children needed discipline, that grief could disguise as defiance. He had told himself many things because telling himself was easier than listening to the small, scared sound his son made at night. He cleared his throat. "Thank you for bringing this to me." She nodded and left, without triumph. In the hall, she exhaled, then pivoted toward the classroom where Ms. Dana was tracing notes with Ethan's finger. The boy's tongue stuck out in concentration. His shoulders were loose for once. He looked up at the door and brightened like a light wired to her presence. "We're learning, Twinkle Twinkle, but not the baby version," he announced. "The subversive version?" Isabella whispered theatrically. "My favorite." Ms. Dana smiled. "He's got a good ear." "He has a good heart," Isabella said, and Ethan ducked his head, pleased. At 3, the housekeeper, Maria, cornered Isabella near the pantry. "Señorita," she hissed under her breath, eyes darting toward the ceiling camera that everyone pretended not to see. "Be careful. She asked me if your references checked out." "Whose references?" "Yours." A quick cross over her chest. She asked about gaps and aliases. Isabella pictured the file she'd turned in, the neat paragraphs, the deliberate omission of months that belonged to a category the agency called personal leave, and life called something harder. "And what did you say?" "That the best recommendation is a child who smiles." Maria's chin lifted, with a courage that always looks small until you try to find it in yourself. I have worked in houses like this for 30 years. I know the smell when someone is trying to make the help the problem. "Thank you," Isabella said quietly. Maria squeezed her hand. Family is who protects you when the contract says not to. The first real blow landed an hour later. Alexander's head of security, a compact man with a calm face named Len, came to Isabella with what he called a situation. "I'd flagged an anomaly," he said in the staff office, where notices curled at the corners and a broken clock insisted it was 11. "Someone accessed the shaded server this morning from the office wing." "The shaded?" "Backups of sensitive docs," he said. "Drafts Alex doesn't want on the cloud. Somebody logged in with a temporary credential and copied 2 files to a USB. Camera feed was conveniently looped." "Looped," Isabella repeated, a word that tasted like old mistakes. Len's eyes were steady. "I'm not pointing. I'm informing. The log shows your staff badge used the service door at the exact time of access." "My badge was in my pocket," she said, "and I was with Ms. Dana and Ethan. You can ask them." "Already did," Len said. "The time matches. But the system doesn't care about alibis. It cares about tags and doors." A dull, patient anger rose behind Isabella's ribs, the kind that doesn't show on the face. "Then someone cloned my badge." Len didn't blink. "That's my guess." "Why are you telling me first?" "Because the person who cloned it wants Alex to hear it wrong." He lowered his voice. "And because I have 2 daughters, and one of them flinches when someone raises their voice. You don't set off those alarms." Isabella swallowed hard. "I didn't do this." "I know." He folded his arms. "But we still have a problem." "What did Alex say?" "Haven't told him yet. Wanted to give you a heads up." The smallest smile. Sometimes the difference between a crisis and a story is who speaks first. She closed her eyes for a second, saw an old classroom in West Texas, a girl with a split lip, a teacher who closed the door and called it discipline. She had learned then that speaking first saved bruises you couldn't see. "Thank you," she said. "I'll talk to him now." She found Alexander in the library, a square of late light falling across him and making his tie look like a shadow he could untie if he remembered how. He was flipping through a draft, pen tapping a restless staccato. "Len came to me," she said. He looked up, eyes already wary. Of what? He wasn't sure. About what? The server. The badge. He exhaled. "He should have come to me first." "He will." She took a breath. "My badge was cloned." Silence again, but this time it was not the compassionate kind. It was a silence that rooms use when they're deciding whose side they're on. "Isabella," he said carefully, "you've been here 5 days. And in those 5 days, your son has slept through the night once," she said, matching careful with true. "In those same 5 days, someone tried to plant a stolen bracelet in my bin, and now this. If I wanted your drafts, I wouldn't need a clone. I'd ask you about them over coffee." A flash of surprise and reluctant amusement crossed his face at the last line, then faded. He rubbed his jaw. "If not you, then who?" "Who benefits?" He closed the draft. "You can't keep repeating that like a charm and expecting it to ward off facts." "What facts?" Her voice stayed even. "A badge log? That can be cloned? A camera loop? That requires access. A bracelet in my bin? I don't wear diamonds, Mr. Grant." He flinched at the honorific. It clicked, the distance in it. "Isabella," he said softer, "I have to treat this seriously. Investors." "We're not in a boardroom," she said. "We're in a house where a 7-year-old stares at his door like it might grow teeth." The pen in his hand stilled. He looked away to the window, where the garden shivered with very expensive leaves. When he turned back, the conflict on his face looked like fatigue. "For now," he said, "limit one-on-one time with Ethan, until Len sorts the logs." The words landed like cold metal between them. Something hot rose up Isabella's throat. She swallowed it. Understood. She left, before he could explain the pain in his own voice. The pain of a man who had learned that caution felt like love, even when it didn't look like it. The change rippled through the house quickly. Miss Dana kept Ethan in the music room longer. The nanny, reassigned from logistics to support, shadowed him close. Victoria watched from doorways with an expression that was not quite glee, because glee would be gauche, and Victoria was never gauche. Ethan noticed. Children always notice before the minutes do. At 4, he sat on the edge of the garden bench, not touching the grass, shoes making half-moons in gravel. Isabella stood by the hydrangeas a few feet away, pretending to study a leaf for signs of disease. The nanny knelt beside him, offering a sticker if he would use brave voice. Ethan stared through her. When Miss Dana finally released him, he slipped off the bench, circled the stone turtle, and gravitated to the person he considered the north on his every compass. He stopped short of her hand. "They said I should play inside," he said to the hydrangea leaf. "Inside is also a place," Isabella said lightly. "But the sun is better," he murmured. "The sun is honest," she agreed. He looked up at her then, eyes glossy. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." She dipped closer, keeping her hands to herself because the nanny was watching, and because she needed him to practice asking for what he needed. "Do you want the trick?" He nodded. "Box breathing," she said. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold. We draw a box with air." Ethan shaped invisible corners with his finger. Inhaled like he was filling a balloon, held still, exhaled slowly, eyes on her the whole time. On the 3rd round, his shoulders dropped. On the 4th, he sat down in the grass without asking if the grass would stain. "Better," he said. "Better," she echoed. They sat like that, 6 feet and a world apart, for a long minute. The nanny checked her phone. The sun did what it always does, went where it was going anyway. When Alexander walked out onto the patio to take a call, he saw them. His son drawing squares into the air like he was copying an invisible window. Isabella mirroring him with small movements, not touching him at all, and somehow holding him more firmly than any pair of arms had. A breath he hadn't known he'd been strangling on, loosened. The call connected, and he said the right things to the right person while staring at the wrong miracle. That evening, the house put on its evening face. Lights under cabinets, candles nobody lit, the kitchen's steel gleam warming to gold. Chef Nico's assistants rotated trays. Victoria floated past with 2 dresses on hangers, pretending to decide though decisions had been made since noon. Isabella moved through the work the way good hands do, present without demanding notice. As she passed the pantry, she saw a small amber bottle on the shelf where there had been none in the morning. It was turned so the label faced in. She didn't change stride. She didn't even slow. She pivoted into the butler's pantry. counted to 12, came back, and this time reached for the top shelf. Her fingers brushed the bottle, cool glass, and palmed it to the light. Night Ease, Herbal Sleep Syrup. With a subheading in tiny font, diphenhydramine HCl 12.5 milliradian per TSP. The seal was broken. Her stomach went cold in a precise way. Diphenhydramine wasn't poison. It was also not for unsupervised experiments on children who already feared the dark. Behind her, a voice was honey. "Having trouble sleeping, Miss Cruz?" Isabella recapped the bottle, turned, and found Victoria in the pantry doorway, as if she had been grown there. "I sleep fine," Isabella said. "Some of us work hard enough to be tired." Victoria smiled lazily, the way snakes smile in children's books. "I like your apron. It says service, without the unfortunate connotations of servant." "Words do that," Isabella said, setting the bottle back on the shelf, but not the way she'd found it. She turned it outward, label facing the world. Slip, slide, cut. Victoria's gaze dipped to the bottle, then rose. "Alex and I are off to dinner. We'll be late. You don't mind locking up?" "It's in my job description," Isabella said. "Is it?" Victoria tilted her head. "Sometimes the job is to be convenient when you're blamed." "Then I'm terrible at it," Isabella said pleasantly. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. "We'll see." After the front door closed on perfume and the hush of expensive doors, the house exhaled. Staff retreated to their routines. Ethan played with his cards on the living room rug, narrating under his breath, in the way kids do when they're putting the world back in order with wheels and tracks. "May I join?" Isabella asked, sitting on the floor at a respectful corner. He nodded, already pushing an engine toward her. "This one gets stuck on the bridge sometimes," he said, conspiratorial. "Mechanical failure or fear of heights?" "Both." They fixed it together. She tightened the imaginary bolt. He blew the imaginary fear out through the whistle. The engine crossed the bridge. He high-fived the air above her palm. Bedtime came with less argument than usual. He brushed twice as long as the chart asked. He arranged the stuffed dog and the toy car beside the pillow. He hesitated at the light. "I can sit by the door," Isabella offered. "You won't see me, but I'll hear you if you need a rescue." "And if I need a song?" "I can hum from the hallway. It's a loophole." He considered the legalities of loopholes and nodded, settling under the covers. She switched off the lamp and left the door a responsible sliver ajar. In the hallway, she sat on the small wooden bench, back to the wall, listening to his breathing deepen, to the house fold itself into night. Her phone buzzed, a tiny vibration against denim. A message from an unknown number slid across the screen. "Do you know who you're working for?" A link followed, a news article behind a paywall. She didn't click. She didn't like links from ghosts. A second buzz. "Ask him about Portland." The number vanished, dissolved into unknown, the way cowards do. Isabella stared at the screen until the letters blurred. The past had more hands than she had counted on, and some of them had kept her number. She set the phone down, breathed her box, and let the hallway's quiet climb back into her bones. At 10:14 p.m., the garage door rolled open, and the house rearranged itself to receive its masters. Voices floated in, the easy murmur of men who had eaten well, a higher register with frost under it. Isabella rose. Alexander entered first, the air of a man who had smiled because the contract asked him to. Victoria came behind, heels ticking, eyes bright with the wine-fueled confidence of a person who believed she was winning because nobody had told her otherwise. "How was dinner?" Isabella asked neutrally. "Productive," Alexander said, which meant nothing and everything. "Delightful," said Victoria, which meant she had been admired. Alexander looked past them toward the stairs. "Ethan?" "Asleep," Isabella said. "He did box breathing." 4x4. Alexander's mouth tipped at the corner, warmth slipping through the tired. "Good." Victoria's gaze flicked to the pantry. So fast a less trained eye would have missed it. Isabella did not miss it. "Also," Isabella said to Alexander, choosing her timing like one chooses where to place a foot on loose gravel, "Len came by." "I spoke to him," Alexander said quickly. "We'll sort it in the morning." Victoria smiled as if a private joke had landed. "And the bracelet," Isabella added mildly. "I returned it to your desk." For the first time, Victoria's control faltered, a micro-twitch near her right eye. Isabella filed it away where she kept details and escape routes. "Thank you," Alexander said. Victoria yawned theatrically. "I'm exhausted." "Coming up, Alex?" "In a minute," he said. She brushed past him, leaving a ribbon of perfume that tried too hard. Isabella turned to go. Habit. Respect. But Alexander stopped her with a quiet, "Isabella?" She paused. "I made a mistake earlier," he said. The words were small and clean. "About limiting time. Until I know more, be with him as you see fit." The correction was a rope thrown across a gap. She took it with a nod that held more than gratitude. "Good night, Mr." She caught herself. "Alexander. Good night." He watched her disappear down the corridor, then leaned against the kitchen island and closed his eyes. He had untied one knot. There were more. midnight, the mansion slept. Lights on timers, cameras red-eyed and steady. The city a low glitter beyond the hill. In the corridor near the office wing, a smoke detector sat crooked, its plastic face a fraction looser than its twin. No alarm sounded. Why would it? There was no smoke. At 2 a.m., Isabella woke with the sense that the room had tilted. It wasn't a sound. It was the absence of a sound, the hum of something that had been steady now fractionally off. She slid from the bed, bare feet silent on the carpet, and stepped into the hall. The air tasted faintly sweet. Her pulse picked up. She moved toward the kitchen, scanning the ceiling, the door seams, the corners where shadows consolidate. Something metallic glinted on the counter by the stove, a matchbook from saffron and slate. Out of place. Deliberate. The pantry door was cracked. She reached for it and stopped, thumb hovering over the latch. On the other side, a whisper. "Make sure the alarms don't—" "Yes, the basement." "No, he'll be asleep." Victoria's voice, threaded with impatience, floated through the slit. A second voice, low and male, replied in static fragments she couldn't place. Isabella slid her phone out, tapped the recorder, and held still. The pantry air was warmer than the halls, the sweetness stronger. Her eyes watered. She took one long, careful breath and stepped back. When she lifted the camera of her phone to the ceiling seam, the lens caught it. A hairline of blackened adhesive around the nearest smoke detector. Not fire. Tampering. Isabella swallowed, tasted metal, and knew with a certainty that had nothing to do with proof. The house with two faces was about to test which one could burn. She ended the recording, saved the file, and walked quickly, quietly, toward Ethan's room. The night had turned. The war hadn't started in the way anyone would recognize, but Isabella could hear the count. 1, 2, 3. Chapter 3. Smoke Without Fire. The mansion was quiet, but Isabella's instinct screamed otherwise. She moved swiftly down the hallway, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. Ethan's room was at the far end, the door ajar just as she had left it earlier. The child's steady breathing reached her ears as she entered. He was curled beneath the covers, toy car tucked under his cheek. "Princess," Isabella whispered, crouching at his side. It was the nickname she'd once used for her younger cousin, the one she had failed to save years ago. She brushed a hand across Ethan's hair. "Wake up! We need to move!" His lashes fluttered. "It's still night." "I know," she soothed, "but there's something wrong with the house. We're going to the garden, just for a little while." The boy yawned, rubbing his eyes, but when she offered her hand, he took it without question. That was the part that shook her most, how easily he trusted her now. As they stepped into the hall, the sweet metallic taste grew stronger. Isabella's eyes darted upward. Every smoke detector along the corridor bore the same faint mark of tampering. She didn't smell fire. No, this was something else. Gas? Chemicals? She didn't know. "Hold your toy, Ethan. Nice and tight," she whispered, pulling him close as they hurried toward the service stairwell. Down in the kitchen, muffled voices still leaked from the pantry. Victoria's sharp tone carried through the thin crack of the door. "No mistakes this time. The system is disabled. When the alarms stay silent, you'll have no choice but to blame her." A man answered, voice low and rough. "And the kid?" "Collateral," Victoria hissed. "What matters is Alex sees her as reckless. Once she's gone, everything else falls into place." Ethan stiffened in Isabella's grip. His small fingers clutched her apron, his eyes wide with terror. He had heard. "Shh," Isabella whispered, pressing a finger to her lips. The boy nodded, burying his face against her. She moved them quickly through the servants' wing, past the laundry where only hours before the bracelet had been planted. Every detail now lined up. The bracelet, the cloned badge, the broken seal on the syrup bottle. Step by step, Victoria was weaving a trap, and tonight would have been the final snare. They reached the garden door. Isabella pushed it open, letting the cool night air sweep over them like a salvation. Ethan gulped in the breeze as though it were freedom itself. "Stay here," she told him, guiding him toward the stone bench where he had first laughed with her days ago. "No matter what you hear, you stay on this bench. Promise me." His chin quivered. "Will you come back?" She knelt, pressing her forehead against his. "I always come back." Inside the mansion, Alexander stirred in his study. He had fallen asleep in the leather chair, files open around him. But the faint sweetness in the air tugged at his senses. Not perfume, not wine. Something else. He rose, frowning, and stepped into the hall, just in time to see Isabella re-enter from the garden, her eyes blazing. "Where's Ethan?" His voice was sharp with panic. "Safe," she said firmly. "Outside. But you need to see this." Without waiting for his reply, she pressed her phone into his hand. The recording played. Victoria's voice, venomous, clear. "Collateral. What matters is Alex sees her as reckless. Once she's gone, everything else falls into place." Alexander's face drained of color. His fiancée's voice was undeniable. Before he could speak, the pantry door burst open. Victoria stepped out, her mask of elegance intact, but her eyes feral when she saw Isabella. "There she is," she hissed, "creeping through the house, sneaking into places she doesn't belong. Alex, I warned you about her. But Alexander didn't look at Isabella, his gaze fixed coldly on Victoria. I heard your voice. Her practiced smile faltered. What? He held up the phone, the recording still glowing on the screen. Explain this. For the first time since Isabella had met her, Victoria Hale looked genuinely rattled. She opened her mouth, then closed it, eyes darting for a lie that wouldn't come. Isabella crossed her arms. Steady despite the adrenaline in her veins. You wanted me blamed for a fire that never existed. But you forgot one thing, Victoria. And what's that? Victoria spat. The children remember who protects them, and who doesn't. From the garden, Ethan's voice rang out, high and clear. She's the evil witch. Alexander turned toward the sound of his son. For months he had ignored instincts, dismissed signs, rationalized cruelty as discipline. But at that moment, hearing his son call out from the night air, seeing Isabella standing tall and unflinching in the hall, the truth crystallized. The house with two faces had chosen. And for the first time, Alexander Grant knew which side he would stand on. Chapter 4. The mask cracks. Morning sunlight spilled into the Grant mansion, too bright for a house that had almost burned from within. Isabella was at the kitchen counter brewing coffee when the news broke. The headline scrolled across the tablet left on the island. Millionaire's maid accused of theft and manipulation. Her stomach tightened. The article was polished, written by someone with access. It painted her as an ambitious outsider, a woman with a troubled past, who had allegedly stolen documents and seduced her way into Alexander Grant's household. At the bottom, a single line cut like a knife. Sources close to the Grant family confirm fiancée Victoria Hale raised concerns weeks ago. The door opened sharply. Alexander strode in, phone pressed to his ear, his voice clipped. I don't care if she bought the journalist dinner. Find out which outlet will print a retraction, or I'll sue them myself. He ended the call, jaw tight, and turned to Isabella. She's faster than I thought. She must have planted this hours before last night even happened. Calculated, Isabella said quietly. She expected to fail inside the house, so she struck outside. Alexander moved closer. Listen to me. None of this changes what I saw, what I heard. You're not alone in this. His certainty steadied her, but a knot of fear remained. She has money, lawyers, influence. People will believe her before they believe me. Ethan padded into the kitchen, hair still tousled. He climbed onto his stool and spoke with childlike conviction. I believe you? He looked at his father. Daddy does too. Alexander ruffled his son's hair. That's right, buddy. We do. By noon, the house was under siege. Paparazzi clustered outside the gates. A black sedan pulled up the drive, and out stepped Damian Cole, Victoria's lawyer, slick suit, sharper smile. He demanded to see Alexander, waving a folder thick with allegations: workplace misconduct, breach of privacy, emotional manipulation of a vulnerable child. Absurd, Alexander snapped, refusing to sign the papers Damian thrust forward. You're defending a woman who drugged my daughter and staged a crime scene. Damian's smirk didn't falter. Do you have evidence, beyond the word of a maid with a suspicious history? His gaze slid to Isabella, as though daring her to flinch. She didn't. I have recordings, witnesses, and a child who isn't afraid to tell the truth. Damian closed the folder with a snap. Then we'll see you in court. That evening, Victoria made her grand move. From the living room TV, her face appeared flawless under studio lights, giving an exclusive interview. She spoke of deep concern for Ethan's well-being and a woman who has overstepped professional boundaries. She dabbed a tissue delicately at the corner of her eye. "She's dangerous," Victoria whispered to the cameras, "and I fear for Alexander if she stays." Ethan turned away from the screen, burying his face in Isabella's lap. "She's lying again." "Yes, sweetheart," Isabella murmured, stroking his hair. "And sometimes lies are loud before the truth finds its voice." Alexander muted the TV and sat opposite them, his eyes burning with resolve. "Then we'll give the truth a voice. In court, in the press, wherever we have to." For the first time, Isabella saw him not just as a grieving widower or a man divided between doubt and duty, but as someone ready to fight for Ethan, for her, for the home they were building. But as the cameras flashed outside and the legal letters piled up inside, Isabella knew Victoria Hale was far from finished. And the next battle would be uglier than any yet. Chapter 5. Truth on Trial. The courthouse steps were a battlefield. Cameras flashed like gunfire, microphones thrust forward as though they could stab truth out of the air. Headlines screamed, "Millionaire's love triangle scandal. Maid or manipulator. Victoria Hale breaks silence." Isabella stood at the entrance, her plain navy dress a shield of modesty against the storm. Beside her, Alexander adjusted his tie with a soldier's determination. Ethan wasn't there. He was safe with Maria, far from the circus. But Isabella felt the boy's trust, like a small hand pressed into her own. Inside, the courtroom buzzed. Victoria arrived draped in designer black, her lawyer Damian Cole at her side. She looked tragic, almost saintly, as if the role of victim had been stitched into her gown. The judge entered. Order was called. The trial began. Victoria's lawyer struck first. "Your Honor, this woman, Isabella Cruz, infiltrated the Grant household under false pretenses. She has no stable work history, no verified references, and we have reason to believe she targeted Mr. Grant and his child to secure financial advantage." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Isabella sat tall, though her pulse thundered. Damian held up a folder. "We submit evidence of missing years in her employment record. Ask yourselves, what was she hiding?" He let the words hang like smoke. It was Alexander's attorney's turn. He rose, steady, deliberate. "Your Honor, what she was hiding wasn't a crime. It was survival." He turned to Isabella. "Miss Cruz, would you like to tell the court where you were during those missing years?" The room fell into a hush. All eyes pinned her. Her throat tightened. She had sworn never to speak of it again. But then she saw Alexander's gaze, anchoring her, and in her mind, Ethan's voice. "I believe you." She rose. "My name is Isabella Cruz, and yes, I have missing years in my record. That's because I wasn't working under my own name. I was living in shelters, under witness protection, after testifying against the man who murdered my sister." The room gasped. Cameras clicked furiously. Even Victoria's composure flickered. Isabella's voice grew stronger. "He was a powerful man, dangerous. I was 19 when I stood in court against him. Since then, I've moved town to town, job to job, never staying long enough for anyone to trace me. I scrubbed floors. I served tables. Anything that paid rent. And I kept quiet, because being quiet meant being alive." A tear slid down her cheek. Not weakness, but release. So if you call that manipulation, then yes, I manipulated fate to survive. But I did not, and would never, manipulate a child who has already lost too much. The silence afterward was heavy, electric. Alexander's hand clenched into a fist at his side, not of anger at her secret, but of rage at the thought of all she had endured alone. The judge leaned forward. The court will review this testimony carefully. But one thing is clear. This is no ordinary dispute. From the gallery, a voice whispered loud enough for many to hear. She's a hero, not a thief. Victoria tried to recover, standing abruptly. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. She's playing for sympathy. But the judge's gavel cracked. Sit down, Ms. Hale. For the first time, Isabella saw true panic in Victoria's eyes. Because masks don't just crack in silence. They shatter in public. Chapter 6. The Last Card. The courthouse recessed at noon, but the fight didn't. Reporters fanned out like gulls on a pier, calling Isabella's name as if it were bait. Alexander's palm pressed lightly to the small of her back, guiding, not steering, as they cut through the noise toward the steps. Damien Cole was waiting at the bottom, a carnivore in Cologne. He lifted a slim flash drive between two fingers. We won't need sympathy today, he said, voice velvet over wire. Just evidence. Alexander's jaw set. If it's real, you would have filed it with the court. Oh, we will, Damien's smile widened, after you answer a few questions about Portland. At the word, something flickered over Alexander's face. Surprise, then anger at the surprise. Damien saw it and savored the taste. No? Nothing to share? He turned to the cameras. No comment, then. A wave of shouts rose from the press, a hydra of microphones lunging closer. Portland. What happened in Portland? Is Grant hiding another scandal? Isabella met Alexander's eyes. He didn't flinch, but she felt the hit land under his skin. Home, he said, low. Now. The gates slid shut behind them. Inside, the mansion felt like a ship riding out a storm, steady by force of will alone. Maria had made caldo from a recipe that healed and fed at the same time. Ethan sat at the table with a pencil, drawing a box around a stick figure with messy hair and a toy car. At the corners of the box, he'd written tiny numbers. 4, 4, 4, 4. He looked up when they entered, the anxious line between his brows smoothing only when Isabella smiled. You came back, he said, as if testing reality for cracks. I always come back, she answered, the promise a habit now. Alexander shrugged off his coat and set his phone face down on the island. We need to get ahead of Portland. Tell me first, Isabella said, so I know what comes when the noise does. He exhaled, leaning against the counter like the story weighed more than his spine. 4 years ago, we were piloting a last-mile delivery prototype downtown. A junior engineer bypassed a failsafe during a demo. The unit jerked off path. No one was hurt, but a cyclist went down. I shut the program within a week, settled with the city, hired an outside auditor, took the PR beating. It was my call to be there, so I took the hit. The texts today, Isabella said, remembering the unknown message from days earlier. Ask him about Portland. Someone wants to reframe it. Someone paid, Alexander said. Victoria knows the outlines. She's been trying to make it look like I hid injuries and data. We didn't. We were loud about it. I was loud. His mouth twisted. Turns out some stains don't fade when you tell the truth. They darken when someone keeps touching them with dirty hands. Ethan climbed off his chair and came closer, small fingers tugging at the edge of Alexander's shirt. Is Portland like a big boo-boo? Alexander crouched. Kind of. When you make a mistake, and you say sorry and you fix it, but some people still point. Ethan considered this with the seriousness of a judge. When I drop my car, and I pick it up, it's still my car, he said. It just sometimes has a scratch. Alexander laughed. Short, genuine. That's exactly right. The laugh died when Len, the head of security, appeared in the doorway, shoulders a notch tighter than usual. We've got visitors. Child Protective Services. Maria made a small cross and shot Isabella a look that was both warning and prayer. The social worker introduced herself as Iris Chang, her manner a blend of steel and tea. She wore sensible shoes, carried a notebook with a frayed elastic, and looked around with a calm that evaluated without sneering. We received an anonymous report this morning, she said, eyes flicking briefly to the wall camera, on as ever. Allegations of emotional manipulation and unsafe conditions. Anonymous, Alexander repeated flatly. It often is, Iris said. I'd like to see where Ethan sleeps, and I'll need to speak with him alone for a few minutes. She hesitated, reading the father's flinch. I understand this is stressful. I'm here to make sure he's safe, not to make headlines. Of course, Alexander said, and his voice almost didn't break. Isabella felt the cut anyway. She forced air slow into her lungs, drew her box, 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out, 4 hold, until the ceiling stopped swimming. Ethan, she said gently, Ms. Chang wants to see your room. You can show her your star stickers and the night lamp. He looked to Alexander, then back to Isabella, then nodded. Can I bring my car? Wise, Iris said. Let's go. They walked down the hall, Ethan on one side of Iris, Isabella a pace behind because the rules said so. In his room, the social worker crouched, not on the chair, but on the rug, and listened more than she asked. She noticed the nightlight. She noticed the door, always slightly ajar. She noticed the chart taped to the wall with hand-drawn rockets and the numbers 4444 in 4 corners of a square. Who taught you that? Iris asked, pointing. Isabella, he said, for when I forget how to breathe. Does it help? He nodded. It doesn't make the bad things go away, but it makes the bad things smaller. When they emerged, Iris's notes were neat. Her glance at Isabella held no hint of prosecutor or pal, just a professional weighing what a child had said against what the law required. Mr. Grant, she said, I'll need to speak with Ms. Hale as part of the referral. She doesn't live here, Alexander said, and as of this morning, she's under a temporary restraining order from the court after yesterday's testimony. Good, Iris said simply. Because the anonymous report included a claim that your fiancé disciplined Ethan physically last week. The line around Alexander's mouth hardened. Claim? We have witnesses. We have my daughter's... He stopped, corrected. My son's word. Iris's gaze softened, nearly imperceptibly. The state calls that a witness, she said. We'll be in touch, for what it's worth. She glanced at the nightlight, at the open door, at the box in the corner of the chart. Breathing squares are my favorite, too. When she left, Maria released a breath like a valve opening on a pressure cooker. Ethan ran to his trains, relief making his feet slap faster than usual. Alexander leaned both hands on the island again. Isabella poured coffee without asking. Portland, she said. We handle it on our terms. He nodded, relief and resolve colliding under his ribs. Len cleared his throat. And we handle Damien's evidence. He filed a notice with the court, claims of footage showing Ms. Cruz accessing Alex's office after hours. He says it's from our own internal cameras. He looped those, Isabella said. Or the man with him did. Len's brows rose. You recognize the voice? In the pantry, she said. 2 nights ago. Male, low, East Bay vowels. She didn't add the way he'd said the kid, like he was asking if a coffee should be to go. She didn't say she still heard it when the house grew too quiet. I pulled the access logs, Len said, and the building automation. Someone disabled the smoke detector matrix from an admin console at 1:47 a.m. 2 nights ago. Admin consoles are only on Alex's study machine and the upstairs family tablet. Victoria's tablet, Alexander said, voice flat. Len nodded. Her Apple ID pinged it. I also have a doorbell cam from the Vanderbilt place next door. Their installers set it to show-off mode, 1080p with infrared. At 1:22 a.m., a dark SUV parked by the hydrangea hedge. Our friend Damien's investigator, name's Case Morrow, met a woman whose hair looked suspiciously like a blowout from the Hale salon. He took something from her. It gleamed like jewelry. Later, at 2:08, the same SUV left. Our cameras show nothing because the feeds were looped. But the neighbors didn't get the memo. Alexander's hand closed into a fist. We take this to the judge. Today. Len tilted his head. And while we do, someone should check the basement. Isabella met his eyes, understood without words. The tamper detectors were a past tense. The person who would try to make the lie a fact might not be done trying. I'll go, she said. I'll go with you, Alexander said. No, Isabella and Len said together, then glanced at each other and almost smiled. Len shrugged. Alex, stay with Ethan. If there's real trouble, we yell loud. Alexander looked like a man told to stand behind a line while his family stood in front of it, which, to be fair, he was. He nodded once, curt, and kissed Ethan's hair because kisses were also armor. The basement breathed cool and industrial. Concrete remembered poured forms. Metal racks held the overflow life of the wealthy. Extra seating, an array of lanterns, the box where last year's holiday had been put away. A faint sound tapped from the far wall. Drip, drip, drip. A pipe condensation, or a metronome for dread. Isabella stopped at the base of the stairs and inhaled. The sweetness from the other night had been sugar on poison. Today, the air felt drier than it should. Len's flashlight slid across the ceiling. Dehumidifiers off, he murmured. Why would anyone? He broke off. The beam had landed on a square of drywall near the utility closet. The paper face looked newer, a shade too white for the rest. At the edges, dark smudges shaped like fingerprints. On the floor below, a matchbook lay open. Saffron and slate gleamed gold. Len crouched, touched the seam, sniffed. Accelerant, he said. Light, like lamp oil. If you lit this, it'd smolder first. No visible flames, lots of smoke, and the detectors are conveniently quiet. Not today, Isabella said. She pulled out her phone, started recording, panned from the matchbook to the seam to the closet door. Len snapped still shots with his work phone. Footsteps creaked on the stair above. Light shifted. Isabella and Len turned at the same time. Victoria stood 3 steps down in 5-inch heels, set against the darkness like a magazine ad for bad ideas. The careful curve of her mouth said she wasn't surprised to see them where they were. The tarnish in her eyes said she'd hoped they wouldn't be. Looking for something? She asked, voice bright. The past, maybe? Or are we on an urban safari for lies? "You brought a matchbook home," Isabella said, holding up her phone. "You should have left it on the table where the wine was better." Victoria's gaze slid past them to the seam. "I don't know what you think you're doing," she said, the temperature dropping. "Documenting," Len said, dry as his name. "Chain of custody. Evidence that someone tried to stage a smoke event in a house with a child in it." Victoria laughed then. An actual laugh, brittle and almost desperate. "Oh, please! I'm not stupid enough to start a fire." "You don't have to be," Isabella said. "You only had to be cruel." Victoria's face flickered, composure rippling like a dress in a draft. "He was mine," she whispered, and the he dragged knives through the air. "For 2 years, I rearranged myself into the woman the world said he deserved. And then you—" Her eyes returned to Isabella, as if the room pivoted on that point. "You arrived with your thrift store shoes, and your tragic backstory, and your perfect little martyrdom." Isabella felt the words land and slide off. "All I did was make his child feel safe. That's what I said." The smile snapped back on, lacquer over rust. "Martyrdom." Len shifted, giving himself a better angle if she ran. "Ms. Hale, we have you on a neighbor's camera passing stolen property to a licensed investigator employed by opposing counsel. We have building logs tying your credentials to a disabled alarm. We have that matchbook. The only thing you have left is a way out that doesn't involve handcuffs." "Is that a threat?" she asked. "It's a map," he said. "Sometimes maps keep people from walking off cliffs." For a full beat, nobody moved. Then Victoria did something unexpectedly human. She leaned against the rail and breathed, shoulders rising and falling like a person who had finally admitted gravity. "Did you really think he loved you?" she asked Isabella conversationally, as if they were at a spa. "Or did you just think you could outlast me?" "I didn't think anything," Isabella said. "I listened. To a child. To myself. To the part of him that couldn't keep pretending." Victoria's eyes went flat, a shutter falling. "Enjoy the cameras," she said, and turned. She was gone up the stairs in a staccato of heels. Len released a breath. "She's not lighting anything today." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling SFPD." "Do it," Isabella said, "and send the neighbor's footage to Alexander's attorney. Damien's evidence just turned into a confession." By 3, the house had new guests, uniformed officers whose patience had edges, a fire inspector who said accelerant and tampered with the ease of a man who'd said them too often, and a forensics tech who dusted the matchbook with a respect usually reserved for heirlooms. Victoria had not returned. Her lawyer left 3 messages, each more indignant than the last. None were returned. A judge's clerk phoned to set an emergency evidentiary hearing for 9 the next morning. At 4, Damien filed his flash drive with the court. By 5, Alexander's attorney had weaponized Len's logs and the neighbor's doorbell footage into a surgical reply that called the drive a collage of spliced loops and asked for sanctions. At 6, the outlet that had run the morning's hit piece posted a developing update with a neutrally worded headline that sounded like a throat clearing. The byline author tweeted something about context evolving. The internet did what the internet does when context evolves. It turned. Just after 7, the doorbell chimed. Iris Chang stood on the threshold again, hair escaping its clip. A line of fatigue between her brows. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, which nobody believed. "Mind if I look in on Ethan?" In the living room, Ethan sat cross-legged on the rug. two action figures facing off above a cardboard bridge. He looked up when Iris entered and grinned tentatively. She grinned back and sat on the floor across from him, knees cracking in betrayal. "Hi again," she said. "How's the breathing box?" "Strong," he said. "It's like armor, but invisible." "Best kind," she said. She glanced at Isabella. "Some kids learn it from YouTube. Better to learn it from somebody whose voice you trust." Ethan picked up the figure with the bent arm. "This one's scared of the bridge," he confided. "Bridges are tricky," Iris said. "But sometimes the person you're crossing with makes it easier." He considered this like a philosopher and nudged the figure forward. The bent arm stopped shaking. When Iris left, she handed Alexander a card. "Unofficially," she said, "I'm not concerned. Officially, we'll close the referral as soon as the paperwork lets us." She added, almost as an afterthought, "I like your house better with the door open." He looked at the sliver of light down the hall and swallowed. "Me too." Night came without drama. It was almost a disappointment. No anonymous texts, no engines idling near hedges. The house creaked like houses do when they're settling, not scheming. Isabella lay awake anyway, the day marching across her skull with boots on. At 2 a.m., she gave up, slid from the bed, and padded to the kitchen for water. The window over the sink framed the garden, black-blue under the city's low glow. In the glass, she saw her reflection, and, beside it, another, Alexander's, rumpled, barefoot, tie long gone, hair refusing to be reasonable. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. "Box got me to 3, she said. 4 betrayed me." He huffed a laugh, then sobered. "I'm sorry about today. CPS, Portland, Damien, all of it." He leaned his hip on the island, eyes on the dark yard. "This shouldn't be your war." "It became mine when I decided not to run," she said. "I spent years moving every time a door creaked wrong. Ethan taught me something, how to stay still when afraid, and breathe anyway." He turned to her then, and whatever he'd been holding in his mouth all day, apologies, plans, old pride, dissolved. "I thought I was protecting him by keeping our world small," he said. "Work here, house there. My heart somewhere I didn't have to look at it too closely. Then you walked in and opened windows I didn't know were painted shut." Silence, warm and ordinary, settled around them like a borrowed blanket. "About Portland," he said, looking at his hands. "I should have told you earlier. The text." "I got one too," she said. 2 days ago. Anonymous. I didn't click the link." "Good," he said, a strand of something like relief loosening at his temple. "It doesn't matter now, but—" "It matters because it hurt," she said gently. "And it matters that you told me. That's how scratches don't turn into cracks." He absorbed that, then nodded slowly. "You speak like someone who knows how to repair things that don't want to be repaired." "I grew up fixing what other people broke," she said. "Houses, promises, girls." He reached for her hand. He didn't ask. He didn't announce. Fingers just found fingers and stayed. The kitchen stayed a kitchen. The night stayed a night. But the line they had both honored shifted a fraction, like a star moving 1 degree and changing navigation entirely. "Ethan asked me tonight," he said softly, "if you were staying forever." "What did you say?" "I told him forever is a thing grown-ups should be careful with," he said, "but that some people earn it by showing up when the house is full of smoke." Her throat tightened. "What if I told you I'm done packing bags in the dark?" "I'd tell you there's a closet here with space and a light," he said. and 2 toothbrushes, because he insisted we buy one with a dinosaur. She laughed then, and the laugh hurt in the best way. I like dinosaurs. We like you, he said. And the word we was a vow. He leaned in. She met him halfway. The kiss wasn't a movie's final swell. It was something smaller, truer, a quiet promise made in a kitchen that had seen lies and hunger. And now, finally, this. When they parted, neither hurried to let go. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he echoed. We finish it. They did not finish it. They ended it. At 9 sharp, the emergency hearing convened. Damien arrived with a swagger he could not keep. The judge watched the looped footage twice, then watched the neighbor's doorbell video once. She listened to Len explain building automation with the patience of a man teaching seat belts to toddlers. She examined the matchbook in its little evidence bag, tilted it to catch the print dust's bloom. She asked 3 questions, each surgical. By 10:30, Victoria's temporary restraining order had been expanded to a full order of protection with criminal referrals appended like sharp little ribbons. At the back of the courtroom, an associate from the outlet that had run the hit piece typed as if absolution could be made with speed. By noon, a headline read, "New evidence undercuts claims against Grant household. Sources retract." The first article remained, but now it wore a bandage no reader would miss. Outside, Damien refused the microphones with the vigor of a man who finally remembered how to refuse. He shepherded Victoria to a car whose paint could not hide the dent anger had made in the morning. She slid into the back seat, eyes glassy and unfocused in a way that no camera could turn saintly. Inside, Alexander signed papers the court clerk gave him, and shook hands he had to. And then he walked to Isabella, who stood by the window with sunlight turning her hair into something warmer than questions. "It's over," he said, and in his voice over meant ours now. She nodded, letting the word find its way down her bones. "Go home?" "Home," he said, and the syllable fit them both. They ate soup at the island, because victory makes you tired, and soup knows what to do. Ethan insisted on 3 spoons at once, to eat like a team, and Maria pretended to scold him while placing extra cilantro on Isabella's bowl, a blessing pretending to be garnish. After lunch, Iris's email arrived, formal and lovely. Referral closed. No safety concerns at this time. A line at the end, human-sized. "Tell Ethan the social worker says his breathing squares are excellent." Alexander printed it and stuck it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a triceratops. In the afternoon, the house did nothing dramatic. It breathed. It settled. It let light be light without reflecting the knives in it. As dusk pooled in the garden, Ethan tugged Isabella's hand toward the lawn. "Picnic," he announced. "Important celebration business." They spread a blanket. The city below blinked on in dots. The hydrangeas held the day's heat like a secret. Alexander lowered himself onto the blanket with the gracelessness of a tall man and the contentment of someone who has forgiven the day for existing. "I have something," he said, and pulled a small box from his pocket. Isabella's breath hitched. Everything in her wanted to run and wanted to stay. She'd learned to distrust boxes with promises in them. He saw the flinch and smiled. Soft. "Not that," he said. He opened it to reveal a ring, not with a diamond, but with a small polished charm, a rectangle with 4 tiny engraved numbers at each corner. 4, 4, 4, 4. "For when you forget how to breathe," he said, "and because forever is a word we'll use carefully. But I'd like to start using it in sentences with your name." He looked at Ethan. "And if she says yes to this, we can ask her about bigger yeses someday." Ethan bounced, trying to sit and orbit at once. "Say yes," he whispered, at a volume the neighborhood could hear. "Please." Isabella laughed, and the laugh carried the sound of a door unlocking from the inside. "Yes," she said. "To the ring. To being here. To not running." Ethan climbed into her lap. Alexander slid the charm onto her finger. It fit like something chosen with attention rather than price. They ate strawberries. They let a bug crawl and made no fight of it. When the first star refused the city's light pollution and showed up anyway, Ethan pointed like he'd discovered it, and nobody argued. Night folded over the house with clean edges. Somewhere in the city, a story updated itself. In the pantry, the shelf held jars and no war. In the basement, the seam waited to be repaired by someone who knew how to soothe materials into agreeing again. Upstairs, a door stood slightly ajar. Light from the hallway spilled in a responsible sliver. In the quiet, Isabella listened to the boy's slowing breaths through the baby monitor that wasn't for babies, to Alexander's step finding a rhythm that matched hers, to the new sound a house makes when it sets down a weight it has carried too long. She drew a square in the air with one finger, smiled at how fast her lungs obeyed, and thought, with a steadiness that felt like a shoreline finally reached, home. Epilogue. The home they built. 6 months had passed since the last gavel fell, since Victoria Hale's carefully crafted mask crumbled under the weight of her own lies. The Grant mansion no longer echoed with fear or suspicion. Instead, it rang with laughter, the shuffle of little feet, and the clatter of pancake pans at odd hours. On a crisp autumn morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Isabella stood in the kitchen, hair loose over her shoulders, humming softly as she packed Ethan's lunch. Peanut butter sandwiches, apple slices cut into star shapes, and a little note tucked inside. "Breathe, count to 4. You're braver than you know." "Mommy, Elena!" Ethan bounded down the stairs, backpack bouncing, his shoelaces trailing behind. He skidded to a stop, grinning ear to ear. "You forgot my car." He held up his tiny toy, the one he never went to school without. "I'd never forget that," Isabella teased, slipping it into the side pocket of his bag. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and tightened his laces. "Ready for first grade?" "Ready for everything," Ethan said, with the fearless confidence only a child could carry. From the doorway, Alexander watched them. He still wore the same tailored suits, but the sharp edges of his life had softened. He wasn't just a CEO anymore. He was a father who made time for breakfast, who knelt to help with homework, who found himself smiling for no reason other than the sound of his son's giggle and the sight of the woman he loved moving through their home. When Ethan ran off to the carpool, Alexander crossed the kitchen, slid his arms around Isabella's waist, and rested his chin on her shoulder. "You know," he murmured, "this house was built with steel and stone, but you're the one who made it stand." She leaned into him, heart full. "It wasn't just me. It was us. And him." She glanced toward the driveway where Ethan waved goodbye, toy car in hand. Alexander turned her gently, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Forever," he said, a word he once used carefully, now spoken with certainty. Isabella smiled, lifting her hand to look at the silver ring engraved with 4444. "Forever," she echoed. Outside, the autumn leaves fell like confetti. But inside the Grant mansion, there was only warmth. A home no longer haunted by deceit, but alive with second chances, laughter, and the quiet strength of a family that had been forged not by blood or titles, but by love, chosen and true. And as the day began, Isabella knew she had finally found what she'd been running toward all along. Not safety, not shelter, but a place where she and the people she loved belonged. A place called home.